This is how I suggest we learn every Pasuk in the Torah. Imagine for a moment Albert Einstein creates a time machine, and he's able to go back 200 years in history, and he sits down with Newton, and because of the technology he's only got 60 seconds. So in that very short time frame, he quickly grabs a piece of paper, a quill, ink, and he writes out 5 symbols. E equals MC². That's it. And shoots off. And leaves Newton with this piece of paper. What would Newton do with that? Exactly. He would do that. He would just laugh. He'd think it's silly. He wouldn't understand what he's got. If for a moment he could appreciate what he's holding in his hand, he would fall off his chair. Forget about the apple on the head. But poor Isaac just can't get it. We're dealing with something greater than that. The Torah makes physics look like child's play. The Torah is the book from which physics was created. When you're reading a Pasuk in the Torah, you're reading something that makes E equals MC² look like a nursery rhyme. And that's why we laugh, and that's why we don't think there's anything significant. If we understood what was here, we'd fall off our chairs. And therefore, when you read a Pasuk in the Torah, and you don't get to that experience, you read it wrong. You didn't see what was really there. You're just reading equals MC² like Isaac Newton. You don't know what you're dealing with. That's the approach we're going to have in going line by line through the Torah. So what we need is a decoder. If Newton had an idea of what E equals MC² meant, the impact would be dramatic. More so, if we knew what these words meant in the Torah, the impact that it would have on our own lives to improve them just tremendously out of the ballpark would be more dramatic, would be more incredible than that. What Rav Noah Weinberg Zt would call mind-boggling. Let me explain. How we learn in life is very simple. We have an expectation of how we think things should go, and when they don't go that way, that gap is the lesson. Now, some people don't learn it, and they just keep making the same silly mistake. So if you learn that lesson, then, according to the Western world, you're wise. Because in the Western world, they say, a wise man learns from his own mistakes. According to Judaism, you're a fool. A fool learns from his own mistakes. Ben Zoma said in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, a wise man learns from other people's mistakes. You stick your finger in the socket and tell me what it's like. A wise man learns from other people's mistakes. A fool has to learn from his own mistakes. But someone who doesn't do that, who just keeps making the same mistake over and again, that's the village idiot. At the least, don't be a village idiot. Be a fool. But the best is to learn from other people's mistakes. That's the incredible power of the Torah. You can learn from other people's mistakes. So as we learn the Torah, as we read each Pasuk, we're going to ask this question. What would I have done in that scenario? And the gap is the lesson. Well, that's true in every Pasuk in the Torah except 2. With 2 Pasukim, with 2 verses, this rule is multiplied geometrically. And those 2 verses is the first line in the Aseret Dibros, the 10 Commandments, and for the same reason, the first line in the Torah. Because these are the lines that we expect something of incredible magnitude. As they say in business, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. It's this first impression when the Jewish people meet the Almighty at Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, And when we meet the Sefer Torah, when we meet the Torah, an opening up in Bereshis, in Genesis, this first experience is going to shape everything. And therefore, our expectation and the gap between what we expect is going to be a tremendous lesson. So we have to ask ourselves this question: how should the Almighty's book start? And that gap between what you think should be there and what is there is a tremendous lesson. Let's begin. Bereshis bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. To get to the mind-boggling of this verse, I want you to imagine the Library of Congress, probably the largest library in the world, gets hit by a giant earthquake. And all the books come tumbling into a massive crater. And a small army is gathered to reorganize them from this giant mess. And the head librarian comes along and says, this is what we're going to start off with. We're going to just do a very simple categorization. Fiction on one side, non-fiction on the other side. The librarian says it's very simple to tell. You open up the book and every non-fictional book starts the same way. How's that? Just open one of your non-fictional books up, right? The books that are true. They all start the same way, with an introduction, a foreword, a preface. You know, it's like the old joke about the rabbi that gets up to speak and he says, before I speak, I'd just like to say a few words. Right? There's an introduction. And every fictional book, pretty much, I mean, there are some exceptions, but pretty much every fictional book just starts off chapter 1. It was the best of years, it was the worst of years. And along comes a Torah, along comes a Bible. Someone picks it up and says, well, where does that fit? And you open it up. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Is that fiction or is that non-fiction? And by our categorization, it should fit into the fictional category. And obviously, this is a big problem. So we have to understand why it is that there's this categorization. And it's very simple. You see, when you go buy a non-fictional book, you want to buy a book on gardening, on cooking, on space travel, whatever it happens to be. So you go to the library, you go to the bookstore, and you've got multiple books, and they're all competing for your service, for your purchase. And each one's got a different theme to it, a different subject, different categorization, different expertise. And the introduction tells the prospective buyer that this book matches, you want English cooking or French gardening or Russian space travel. What is it you're specifically looking for? And it gives the qualifications of the author. Does he know what he's talking about? In a fictional book, you don't care about any of those things. No one picks up a book on Star Wars because they're interested in landing on the moon. The introduction is there to lead the reader into understanding that this book is going to fulfill the purpose for which I'm going to read it, I'm going to buy it. Which just makes the question greater. Where's the introduction? And obviously, to make it more incredible, if you're going to put an introduction in the Torah that's going to set itself apart from every other book in the universe, where are you going to put it? And it's going to be right at the very end of the book. Mind-boggling, right? You can just go look it up, chapter Zintavarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 33, verse 4. And there's the introduction. Torah siva lanu Moshe, morashat kihilat Yaakov. The Torah was commanded to us by Moshe, is an inheritance of the community of Jacob. What's it doing at the end of the book? Obviously, that's not the introduction. Where is the introduction? The introduction comes from the parents. The first thing a parent teaches their child is that Pasuk, is that verse. We have a Torah, Torah Chaim. Torah means instructions. Torah Chaim, as Rav Noah Weinberg Zt used to say, means instructions for living. Today, you go buy a toothbrush, it comes with instructions. A camera, you buy a jumbo jet, 747, it comes with a library of instructions. You have to be a village idiot to think that life, the most complicated thing in existence, is life itself, does not come with instructions. Nobody gets through life unscathed without instructions. Look at the world. Eagles born into nests 60 feet in the air. First flight, they're on their way. Monkeys climbing massive trees. Lions catch gazelles. Every single thing in life knows exactly what to do. But not human beings. You will be hard put to find a single thing that a human being can possibly do that doesn't need intensive instructions, let alone all of life, let alone marriage, let alone parenting, let alone earning a living, let alone being happy, let alone everything. That's what a parent's first line, first idea, first concept. We have an instruction book of life. It's called the Torah. It's part of our inheritance. That's the introduction to the Torah. So this is a mind-boggling idea. This book is not just a book. It's part of a whole educational experience. It's a relationship, it's a partnership between the parents, the Almighty, the Torah, the child. Altogether, the book works. They all have to play their part in creating the experience before the child even opens up the first page. Now you understand a very interesting thing. It used to be the traditional way to start first day of Heder, first day of school, was to open it up in Vayikra. Why Vayikra? An incredible idea, an underlying principle that's going on here. Nothing in life is ever what it really is. It's all relative to what we expect it to be. In other words, you go to the gym and you're expecting a workout and the equipment's not working and you're going to be frustrated. You go on a cruise and you have to puff your own pillows, you're going to be upset too. It doesn't matter what it is you get as long as it matches what you expect, whether it's pleasant or difficult. It doesn't make any difference. As long as it matches what you expect to get, you're going to be happy. It's like the old joke about the husband who's in a florist and he's picking out a very expensive bouquet of flowers and the florist rings up this very impressive bill and she says, "A surprise for your wife," and he says, "Yes, she's expecting diamonds." I have a student who volunteered for the Israeli army. Now, I'm sorry to say this, but the Israeli army doesn't have a high view of Americans. So they generally put them in like lower ranks and doing grunt work. But this kid, he didn't want that. He wanted to be a paratrooper, the elite unit. He wanted to jump out of airplanes. Now personally, if I'm flying from here to Boston on United and they throw me out the plane 20,000 feet in the air, I'm going to be really disappointed. But he was disappointed because that's exactly what did not happen to him. And he complained enough that they finally said, "Fine, we'll give you a shot." And he got his dream. It doesn't matter if what you get is difficult or easy as long as it matches your expectations. I'll give you an example. I've been doing marriage counseling now for something like 30 years, and I like to say I never met an unhappy couple. They're all disappointed. Nobody is unhappily married. I know we call it that. I know people say that, but they're not unhappily married. They're disappointed. You can't be unhappily married with what you have. You're just disappointed. You're expecting something else. And I never had a couple come in and one of the spouses tell me, you got to understand, Rabbi, that what I'm going through, my spouse wets the bed on a regular basis. Now, I don't know what marriage issues you might have if you're watching this or listening to this, but nothing will rise to the occasion, rise to the level of that. Yet that's a frequent occurrence of anybody who has children, and yet nobody complains. Nobody's unhappily a parent because their children do the most incredible things. What's going on with marriage? We grow up in a Western civilization, what's called the romance movie. And it's very hard to not be affected by this. But all romance movies end the same way. They go off and they live happily ever after. And those are very dangerous messages to give, because people get married and that's what they expect to see happen. They don't show romance movies 5 years into the relationship. Those are called murder mysteries. No marriage can live up to this fictionalized nonsense. So when you don't get that, you're disappointed. You're not unhappy, you're just disappointed. And Judaism is very conscious of this, so much so that we start the first day in Vayikra because we don't want to disappoint the children. And the children are coming expecting to hear an instruction book of life. And that's what the kids coming expecting to see, the instructions. And so we're so sensitive to that because disappointment is worse than unhappiness. People don't get divorced because they're unhappy. They get divorced because they're disappointed. Human beings are built to live in an unhappy environment. We're not built to live in disappointment. Now this is a point that's going to come up much later when we see the Jewish people leave Egypt and they spend 3 days in the desert. Now 3 days in the desert without food or water is really tough. I've never tried it, I've just been told. But it's really tough. And they don't complain. And then they hit Marah. And Marah is an oasis, but the water there is bitter. Now, which is worse? No water or bitter water? They can tolerate no water, but they can't tolerate bitter water. They're not complaining because they're unhappy. They're complaining because they're disappointed. We can tolerate unhappiness. We can't tolerate disappointment, and that's why they complain. Now this is very crucial because you can't cure a disease with a cure from a different disease. You can't cure unhappiness the way you can cure disappointment. They're two very different diseases. Now in the Western world, we lump them all together and we all call it unhappiness, but they're very different kind of things. Disappointment is debilitating. It's far worse than unhappiness. Human beings can tolerate unhappiness. Nobody gets divorced because they're unhappy. They say that's what they're getting divorced for, but it's not because they're unhappy. Human beings are quite able, we're built to tolerate unhappiness. Please God, you live a life which is joy and singing 24/7. But most people have a day that they're living with varying degrees of unhappiness. If you have a job, most likely you are unhappy. In other words, you win the lottery and now you've got $3 billion. Are you going to give up golf? Are you going to give up tennis? Are you going to give up fishing? Are you going to give up eating fancy foods and doing whatever else you like to enjoy in life? No, because you love doing those things. What are you going to give up? Your job. Because as much as you like the job, you have to do a job, you have to work, but it doesn't make you happy. It's just since you have to work, this is a really good way of doing it, or the best I could possibly find. But you don't start golf when you get the $1 billion because it's nothing to do with whether it's my job or whether I make money in it. I just love doing it. It's something I love to do. And therefore, whether I can afford to or not, it doesn't make any difference. So therefore, we're built to tolerate unhappiness. We could do it 8 hours a day. So how come we can spend 8 hours a day working, and we're fine doing that, and we can't stand 20 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, with our spouse? Because we're not unhappy, we're disappointed. Chris Rock makes this point. He says, Nelson Mandela spent 23 years in a South African prison. Now, we've got to appreciate what that experience must have been like, to sit in that prison as a black man in South Africa in those days. Nevertheless, he gets out of prison, and within 6 months he divorces his wife. And you have to ask the question, what did she do to him in that 6 months? He can stand the 23 years in a prison, but he can't stand 6 months with his wife. Right? And the answer is because he's not unhappy with his wife, he's disappointed with his wife. We human beings are built to tolerate unhappiness. We're not built to tolerate disappointment. That's why we're happy with our children and not with the same degree of happiness with our spouse. Because our children meet our expectations and our spouses don't. So the simple solution is change your expectations. Now, this doesn't mean lower your expectations. That's very, very important. It means get the right ones. If you have the right expectations, you'll be in bliss. So now we understand why we lost a whole generation of Jews after the Holocaust. Because they didn't get the introduction. In other words, if you don't get the introduction from your parents, then you open the same book and you're going to read it as fiction. And if it doesn't live up to the fiction that you're used to, Sesame Street or whatever it happens to be, you're going to be disappointed, and you can't tolerate disappointment. It took the schools a whole generation to figure out what was going on, so that they changed the first day of school to Bereshis and not Vayikra. But if you don't give your children the introduction, it's going to be very difficult relating to Torah. Now we understand the first Rashi, which is a mind-boggling Rashi. Let me just read it out and then we'll talk about it. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rashi is quoting Rabbi Yitzchak. Lo haya tzirid lechetchilat Torah ela machadish zeh lachem. The Torah should have started by the first mitzvah, Rosh Chodesh, which is in the book of Exodus. I just want to preface what I'm going to say to something that is really obvious. I am not fit to hold the shoelaces of Rashi. The truth of the matter is, I'm not fit to hold the shoelaces of the guy who holds the shoelaces to Rashi. And maybe you can add 10 more generations to that. However, Rashi is taking on the Almighty, where the Almighty wants to start his book. Who's to say that you shouldn't do that? And what a tremendous chutzpah it is to tell anybody how to start their book. But now we understand what he means. Because he's talking about if you have an introduction that says we have an instruction book of life, a book of instructions, then it should have started with the instructions, not with the story. But now he's going to give you the answer. So why does the Torah start here? And this is mind-boggling. Listen to what he has to say. Shum kach ma'asav, he quotes Tehillim, Hagid la'amo, to give the Jewish people an inheritance amongst the nations. She'im yomu ha'omos ha'olam, if the nations of the world will say to the Jews, you are thieves, that you stole the land of Israel, then we can say to them, the whole world is God's. This is what vibration. The basic principle is if you can create existence, you own existence. Don't mess with the big guy. He created the world and gave it to who it was. He took it from them and gave it to us. And then, we can quote the famous Talmudic dictum, tough cookies. That's life. Get used to it. This Rashi is just, again, I just want to give you a perspective. Rashi lived basically in the middle of the Middle Ages. In the time frame that he lived in, for 1,000 years before and 1,000 years after, the rule of law was this, accepted by every human being on the planet. If you take something that doesn't belong to you, it's called stealing. And everyone understood that, and everyone agreed with that. Except one thing. There was one thing that everyone agreed that it was morally correct, appropriate, and the only and right way to acquire it. Legally, properly, righteously. And that is land. The only way you can acquire land, that this can be your country, is if you conquer it, if you take it from somebody else. And everybody lived like this, and this was the appropriate way to do it. You have a war, I win, this is now my country. Right? And every country lived with this, and every country in the world followed this rule, and it was all fine. No one had a problem. Just as an interesting digression here, which is my occupational hazard, I always like to joke that on my tombstone they're going to write, he digressed. He's buried somewhere else. So an interesting digression. When did the world change this? Well, the United Nations got together and said, we're not going to do this anymore. From now on, right, you can't take people's land. It's not the appropriate way to acquire land. Which year did they decide this on? 1948. Which they don't even really follow till today, except when it comes to the Jews. But I don't want to get too political here. That's a digression. Rashi is writing that the nations of the world will come together and say to the Jews, you stole the land. When Rashi wrote that down, it must have seemed like just a crazy idea. And for sure, nobody could possibly understand, I don't want to say understand it, but it was not a reality of anyone's world. In which universe are anyone going to say you stole the land? I mean, every country is living off land that they stole. So how are they going to say to the Jews, you stole? Even if the Jews could steal the land, could take the land, like who's going to point the finger and say, you stole the land? Right? So, okay. 1948 comes along, and for the first and only time in human history, the United Nations, means the world, got together and decided to give the Jews a country. We didn't take it. It was given to us as a gift from the world. Now, true, if I steal something, God forbid, and I give it to you, you can't take it. It's still stolen property. But nevertheless, the thief can't say to the recipient, you're a thief, you're taking what I gave you. Other people might say it, but not the thief. So anyone who knows this Rashi in 1948, well, now it can't. I'm sorry, I don't know what we're going to do with this Rashi. 1948. How are we going to explain this? There must be a Kabbalistic idea somewhere in what Rashi is talking about, because we're really stuck. We better not teach this in schools anymore, because they're going to think we're just charlatans. It's just crazy. I mean, the whole world, who are thieves, who stole their own lands, and stole the land of Israel, by the way, took it away, right? And the British gave it to the United Nations, said, you decide what to do. And they voted. Well, they can't possibly come and say to the Jews, you guys are thieves. I mean, that's just crazy. Mind-boggling. What happened? The world comes along and says, you're thieves. I mean, it's just, how does this happen? So I have a question for you. The Torah is written for the Jewish people. And Rashi is saying that the whole reason that the Torah was written here, and not all the way in Shmos, in the book of Exodus, is so that we would be able to tell the nations of the world that we're not thieves. God gave us this land. So I asked Rav Yaakov Weinberg Zt this question. Doesn't it seem like Rashi is saying that the Torah was written for the Gentiles? He looked at me and he said, imagine for a minute the Prime Minister of Israel stands up in the United Nations. Forget about this 242 Balfour Declaration nonsense. The reason why we Jews are entitled to the land of Israel is quite simply because it says so in this book. What do you think would happen next? So he said, an Arab would stand up right after him and quote his book, and then some other guy his book. They just laughed the Prime Minister out. So I looked at Rav Yaakov. So then what's Rashi saying? Rashi is not telling us what to say to the Gentiles so that the Gentiles will believe it. Rashi is telling us that we need to say this to the Gentiles so that we will believe it. Who are the people that do not believe that we're entitled to the land? And this is a problem that goes back to Avraham, in which he said to the Almighty, how will I know that I will get this land? This is endemic into the Jewish people. But it's us that have the problem in believing we are entitled to the land. So now I hope you're ready for the mind-boggling on the mind-boggling. Remember what Rashi is writing in the middle of the Middle Ages. And he's quoting Rabbi Yitzhak. So if it would never have been that the Jews would not come back to the land of Israel, so then according to Rashi, the Torah didn't need to start here. And if it had never have been that the Gentiles would say, you stole the land, then similarly, the Torah did not need to start here. And if it won't be that the Jews will all come to believe that God gave us a Torah and gave us the land so that we will answer them that we're not thieves, then the Torah did not need to start here. In other words, if you don't believe that all the Jews are going to come back to Torah and come back to the land of Israel, then you believe that God made a mistake in starting the Torah here.